Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Neil Furminger. I'm the head of Cyber Essentials. The delivery partner is IASME. That's who I work for. Okay, and some of my colleagues are also on the call here, monitoring your questions as they come through. I've worked in IT support for 20 years. I'm been involved with Cyber Essentials now for 9 years. That's important to note, as Cyber Essentials is actually 10 years old this year. It's celebrated its 10-year anniversary. I've worked at a certifying body. In fact, I created a certifying body. I've been an assessor for CE and CE Plus, so I have a wide range of experience in the field about Cyber Essentials. But since I've been at IASME, I heavily help develop the scheme on the technical side. I'm the chairman of the technical working group with the NCSE, and I've participated in the last 4 updates of the scheme since 2020. I'm also very contactable as well. One thing we do at IASME, we like to hear feedback and be accessible to people. So if you want to contact me after this presentation, my email address is on screen currently. So without further ado, let's talk about Cyber Essentials. So what is Cyber Essentials? It is a certification scheme backed by the UK government. And significant for this presentation, that means is the controls that are outlined in Cyber Essentials, the 5 technical controls, are also made up and part of the Department of Education's cyber security advice. There's a lot of advice on there and also guidelines to what they expect in the education sector, and the 5 controls are heavily included within that guidelines. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview of Cyber Essentials. There are people on this call who are interested in Cyber Essentials, maybe new to it, but equally there's a lot of people I can see on here that are well involved with the scheme as well. So Cyber Essentials is a set of technical controls that are designed to prevent a common cyber attack from taking place. A way to look at this is your airbag or seat belt as if you're in a car, and helps you prevent having a major accident effectively with your IT systems. These controls are set up based on a risk assessment from the NCSE that is maintained, and these are the 5 main areas that the NCSE consider will help prevent a common cyber attack. So that means it will prevent 80% of cyber attacks from taking place. So we have firewalls and routers. These are your devices that connect your networks and your devices to the internet and give you a barrier between the internet and those devices. Secure configuration is about how you configure your devices to make sure there isn't any extra stuff on there that could be freely used by an attacker to carry out a cyber attack. Security updates is about keeping your systems patched and update and make sure that they are supported. So this is a very important area. Access control is about your user accounts on your systems, how they are protected, how they are created, and the passwords or authentication systems, how you log on to those systems, is configured. And finally, the final one is malware protection. So this is like a barrier. If you are attacked, this should kick in and help you. This is like antivirus software to prevent viruses or clicking on dodgy links, etc. And it should help and give you an element of protection. So they were the 5 controls. I could talk about 5 controls for a long time and take up the whole hour, but that wouldn't be useful for this session. What I want to talk today about is the challenges for schools and colleges. So the main 5 areas we have is scoping of assessments, multi-factor authentication and cloud services specifically, the use of student devices, unsupported devices in the education environment, and applying security updates in 14 days. I'm not going to provide any detailed slides about this except for one area about multi-factor authentication. But one of the challenges we see in schools, let's talk through these individually, is the scoping of assessments. What areas of an education, a school or college networks are in scope? That is a challenge. This is not only a challenge to schools and colleges, this is a challenge to a lot of people who go on or are trying to achieve cyber essentials. So one area I want to talk about is if you have a student network that is treated like a guest network to allow the students' devices, that area will not be in scope for cyber essentials. I want to make that quite clear from the outset. Treat it as a guest network. What we're interested in here for cyber essentials is connected those networks that provide the business operations of the college, the education part of it, but where a student is allowed to connect and you offer internet for the student to use within their time in their day, that particular network, if it's only for students, for guests, for access to the internet, and you provide that, that is not in scope for cyber essentials. In other businesses and organizations, we call it a guest network, but if it's specifically only for students, then that would not be in scope. The cloud services, however, that the students connect to, they are in scope for cyber essentials. Now, there's obviously challenges for students and education establishments over the use of multi-factor, but I will go into that a little bit more depth very shortly. Okay. So student devices. This is often talked about a lot with cyber essentials. Student devices, if they are connecting to a student network, guest network, they are not in scope for cyber essentials. If they are connecting to a network where your staff are also connecting, then they would be in scope because those student devices provide a threat, could present a threat to your networks. You ideally and you should really consider having a segregated network for your students and their devices. Keep it away from the business operations of your establishment. Unsupported devices. Now, this is an area that comes up a lot also in education. So we talk about unsupported devices. When a device, or just say the operating system that's associated with those devices, goes end of life, they are no longer presented by the vendor. So this could be Microsoft, or it could be Apple, or it could be a Linux-based operating system. When they go end of life, they're no longer supplied with security patches, updates, or vulnerability fixes. This means that inherently, from the day they go end of life, they become very vulnerable and a target for attackers, and they should not be used on the internet in the cyber essentials world. So we are trying to prevent threats or cyber attacks from the internet when we talk about cyber essentials. Having those unsupported devices with unsupported operating systems, I mean, it's really focusing on operating systems here for cyber essentials. They can prevent, they can provide a threat to your organization, your establishment, your education site, etc. So you want to make sure that you are no longer using unsupported operating systems, and I will talk about one in particular shortly. And this is one of the leads on to one of the next really big challenges in this area is applying security updates within 14 days. Applying security updates in 14 days has been a well-established timeline. It's been throughout the 10 years of Cyber Essentials, and it is recognized across the cybersecurity world as an established timeline to apply these updates within. Now, that does present in education a challenge because having the downtime with those with your devices that are under your administrative control, but it is something that needs to be achieved to attain Cyber Essentials. Cannot stress how important it is to make sure your devices are updated as soon as possible with the latest updates to prevent cyber attacks. Attackers use these devices with vulnerabilities on unsupported or not up-to-date operating systems. They use that as an attack surface to come in. So that's something that needs to be done. It's a real challenge. I'm happy to take loads of questions on these various subjects here. I know these are the challenges, and I'm sure there'll be other ones that come up in the chat that may not have thought about, but I want to really talk about those. So I want to get onto your questions as soon as possible because this is your time and I want to make it as benefit for you. But what I do want to talk about a little bit more is multi-factor authentication. This is the area in education we get challenged on the most. Obviously, in some schools, etc., we are seeing more and more banning of the use of by the students or the pupils of having smartphones in the classroom, etc. Yeah, it's obviously been in the news recently. So it presents a challenge because we're talking about multi-factor authentication, and a lot of people associate multi-factor authentication with the use of an app on a smartphone to authenticate and allow access after entering a username and password. And obviously we get the pushback that we don't allow smartphones, or younger pupils don't have access or don't have a smartphone. Well, one thing you need to be careful of is when you're using cloud services, remember that if you're accessing it across the internet, so is the attacker. They're accessing it across the internet as well. So that presents them an opportunity, if it's not authenticated correctly or logged in correctly in a secure manner, that presents an opportunity that cloud service can be attacked. So we talk about this a lot, and I have talked with many education establishments over the years about this and get challenged, though it's all about authentication apps. There are many methods of multi-factor authentication that don't require an authentication app on a smartphone. Now, this is called the trusted device method. So you trust the device with some form of certificate or background check of that device that you trust and you have administrative control over in your establishment. That means it will block access, from people who are not using a trusted device in your organization. If you allow some of your staff, etc., to work remotely, it will then, when they're outside the network, they will then be asked to use an authentication app, maybe to log in. So you need to have the second method there when they're off the network with those trusted devices. Now, just to throw a little curveball in this morning, I've been quoting a particular NCSE MFA multi-factor authentication guide for a number of years, which is what we follow for Cyber Essentials. I've gone to put you the link in here, and I've had a look at that article again to just refresh myself, and I was going to present a particular piece out of it, and I noticed it was updated last Thursday. Okay. They present on the particular page of recommended types of MFA 5 different methods that they consider are safe and offer a level of multi-factor authentication that can be used in various different businesses, organizations, education sector, etc. The one I'm particularly talking about for classroom-based devices, etc., and on your business side of the networks is option 1 of this new article. It talks about how you trust a device, and you know, so your IT teams would understand what's connecting. I haven't had time to fully digest the whole article, but there's a lot more detailed information within this new area of the multi-factor advice and the NCSE, and I would recommend anybody reads that when they're looking at this. But the trusted device method is what we often recommend to the education sector. Just want to make you aware, and I know the reason we've done this webinar is about the announcement from Department of Education was to discuss and mention that they have said that all colleges in the UK must have Cyber Essentials by the end of this educational year. And during that period of time, I want to make you aware that we have there will be a new version of Cyber Essentials, which was only launched last Monday on the 23rd of September, with a go live date to the 28th of April. We've given a lot more notice on these requirement updates than we previously had. We used to give 3 months, but we've given 7 months notice this time, and I hope that will be of benefit. The main reason for that is we've done an update because we are now allow passwordless authentication methods to be used and accepted within Cyber Essentials. Now that may be an opportunity to the education sector to look at how they authenticate people. It could be passwordless authentication. We have seen a number of options being presented for primary school students to be able to log into services using passwordless methods. It's not only about biometrics, there are many innovative ways and innovations going on within this area, and that's why Cyber Essentials has adopted and allowed passwordless to be part of the scheme. It's also generally a change that's being seen throughout the industry as there is a steady change to move away from password-based systems alone. There will be a new question set that will be called Willow. The current question set is called Montpellier, and you will not be able to apply to get Cyber Essentials on the Montpellier question set after the 28th of April 2025. Within the new question set, which is also being published and available from the IASME website, there's a lot of links to the Cyber Essentials Knowledge Hub, and the specific control requirement from the NCSE Cyber Essentials requirements document has been listed in the question guidance, so you can see where it fits in with the scheme. So as I say, we've made some changes to the self-assessment, allow passwordless authentication. There's a change to security update management, and this is about applying vulnerability fixes. So not all updates and patches by vendors fix the vulnerability anymore. They often require a little bit extra. So that's what they call it, or we call a vulnerability fix. So it might be a registry fix or a configuration change, etc. But they need to be applied to address the vulnerability that's been identified. There is a big one that was published earlier this year relating to Microsoft email systems called Exchange, and that particular vulnerability had a score of 9.8, which made it critical, was not fixed by a patch or an update, but was actually fixed by installing a further feature into the Exchange system. And that is partly why we had to make this change, because Cyber Essentials is about protecting organizations from attack and preventing those attacks. So if there's a vulnerability fix that will prevent a critical or high vulnerability, we need it to be applied to meet the the compliance with the scheme as of April next year. And also we just changed the home working section from home and remote working to home and remote working to acknowledge that really if you're working at home, it's remote working. So if you do have people who generally don't work at home but work remotely, they will still need to be covered in the scheme. We made some changes to CE Plus. This won't affect you, it affects the assessors more than anything, but they will need to verify the scope, the sample size, and the segregation that is declared within the self-assessment part of Cyber Essentials. So Cyber Essentials is in two parts. So we have the self-assessments, that's where you fill out a questionnaire, and then it's verified by an assessor if the answers are compliant with the scheme. And the second one is CE Plus. So they are, or the assessor goes and audits against the answers to make sure you actually have those control measures in place and you actually are applying them on your networks. And the final thing really here is that the word illustrative has been taken out of the CE Plus test specification document as just a requirement that was requested by a number of organisations in the higher education sector. Okay, so where can you get advice specifically on for the education sector? Right, so we launched earlier this year the Cyber Essentials Knowledge Hub. It's a central source of up-to-date information about the Cyber Essentials scheme, about updates, patches, vulnerabilities, sector-specific guidance, and resources to help you through the certification process. Now, we have a whole section in the Knowledge Hub for the education sector, and we have recently updated all the documentation for education, and we will be expanding on that as we go along. No doubt, maybe from the questions and answers that will be given today, we will have new things we need to discuss, and maybe we will identify things we'll add to that Knowledge Hub. It is regularly updated. You'll see from the dates, the stuff about the education sector. There are new articles on there that have been recently updated. We'll now have to update the multi-factor articles based on the fact that the NCSE have updated their guidance. So we'll do that as soon as we possibly can to help you out. But this should be seen as your central source of knowledge. But we do have other ways you can get help. So you can talk to a cyber advisor. There are 100 plus cyber advisors now in the UK. They are listed within the IASME website and they can be contacted. A lot of them are also associated as assessors as well, so they're highly knowledgeable about the scheme. You can contact a certifying body. They will be able to offer you advice and guidance to help with your applications. And there is this Cyber Essentials Knowledge Hub. We have a readiness tool available on the IASME website as well, which can provide you with a gap analysis where if you're starting your journey to Cyber Essentials and you think you're nearly there, you can go through the process of following the Cyber Essentials readiness tool, and it may identify areas you've not thought about, but it will link you to guidance to help you see what position you are in before you go through the whole Cyber Essentials certification process. Okay, so this is a screenshot of what the Cyber Essentials Knowledge Hub looks like. You'll see, if you can see on the screens, you'll see there's a whole section on sector and size, and it is getting really good feedback. We are always updating and looking to improve. Now, one big area which is a real source of challenge for many organisations that does Cyber Essentials is operating system support. And so if you don't understand what operating systems are supported and how long and the dates, etc., well, we've tried to demystify it for everybody. I can assure you it's not easy. Two of us look at it on a regular basis about trying to keep these particular pages updated. and our support team, that's our tech support team, who can also provide you with advice and guidance. They also look at this, and this is the central source we use now to provide you with your end of life dates around operating systems. And it is hard. Some of the vendors make it very difficult to understand the end of life, etc. And we really are here to make your journey as easy as possible. So we have tried to demystify some of those sites. Okay, so following on from that, and for those who are not aware, Windows 10 will become unsupported next year. In fact, we are literally, like, by the looks of this now, 54 weeks away from Windows 10 becoming unsupported. So it'll no longer have any security updates unless you buy into their extended security update program, which will be at an additional cost, which doubles year on year for 3 years. So the first year, I understand, will be £50 per device. Second year, £100 per device, and the third year, £200 per device, if we following the model that was used when they did this for Windows 7. Okay. So it is important to note that Windows 10 goes end of life next year unless you're buying this extended security update package. It's also worth noting that if you're using the following products: Exchange 2016, 2019, Office 2016, and Office 2019, they also go unsupported and end of life on exactly the same date next year. This is quite a major shift from Microsoft, and is definitely a push to being a more cloud-centric system and service vendor. Okay, so they are moving very much into the cloud, and some of these services will only be available if you're very, very large enterprises to have them on premise. But we didn't do an education piece on making people aware of Windows 10. So if you'd already know about it going end of life, I'm sorry for repeating myself, but we've been doing this since June last year. But we really are entering nearly the final year of Windows 10. So please be aware. That's the end of the presentation. Now I do want to make this about you guys and answer your questions, etc. Okay, there's a nice long one here to start with. Vulnerabilities are rated using the CVSS method. The specifications CVSS states entities should perform their own risk assessment on the applicability and risk presented by vulnerability. On that basis, why does Cyber Essentials not allow risk assessment for vulnerabilities as an acceptable method to decide if a vulnerability should be patched by your organization or not? Cyber Essentials, there is a risk assessment behind it, and that risk assessment is carried out by the NCSC. So the NCSC have determined and agreed that all critical and highs from the CVSS scoring should be applied to be compliant with the scheme. It's something that has been discussed many times. What you're talking about where they make a judgment is called temporal scoring. We removed temporal scoring because, unfortunately, there isn't much room in Cyber Essentials for a risk judgment to be made. The risk judgment actually is whether you apply the controls of Cyber Essentials or not. And that's why it was decided that all high and criticals should be applied to be compliant with the scheme. How would cyber attacks occur from not applying security updates? Security updates are usually there to fix security vulnerabilities in your software. So if you not patch some software and there's a vulnerability in it, an attacker can use that to gain access to your systems, to monitor it, to view or take over those systems. If you don't plug the vulnerabilities, you are leaving yourself exposed to a cyber attack. They can identify um, if the vulnerability hasn't been fixed, or they can see that by using their own vulnerability scanners, etc., and they will check. And if they can find that, they can manipulate and gain access to your systems. That is why. There will be there is going to be a link to the recording of this webinar. Yes, we're going to do that. Okay, I can see there are some in the Q&A. Right, so I'll go through these. Let me just do this. If students are using personal devices on the isolated network, how can that device use trusted method? Well, you can't, you won't be able to use, if the student devices aren't in scope, so you won't have administrative control over those devices. So for the students, you would need to, on a student network, you would need to use the MFA option. You don't have administrative control over them. You can't install the certificates, etc. So that's where an alternative version of MFA. So that may be where the um, smartphone authentication app will be used for those devices. Are staff personal mobiles in scope if they add their email account to their mobile phone? Yes, they would be classed as BYOD or bring your own devices. They have access to an organizational server or organizational service or an organizational data. So yes, they would be in scope for the Cyber Essentials assessment. Remember that those BYOD devices, because they're an employee of yours, they do present a risk to your organisation if you don't have some control over them. And yes, that's a risk judgment you take to allow your staff to use BYOD or personal mobiles to access those services. So there needs to be that element of control over them. Right, Mark Hope, we get asked the following: staff within our school who use personal mobile devices but access them through Teams. The same question has just been asked. Are these considered to be in scope, or can they be worked around through a policy? They are considered to be in scope. And what we always say, at bare minimum, you should be checking that they have a supported operating system. No, you may not be able to push MDM to them, but remember that personal devices present a threat if you have no control over them or understanding of what operating system they are using. Okay. This is often talked about. I was at a presentation. I was at a presentation with a member of the NCSC a couple of weeks ago, and this came up, and it's a very senior person at the NCSC, and they'd say a lot of threats come through personal devices. There needs to be some control over it. You wouldn't want to let them use Windows XP or an outdated version of Android 4 to access your emails. You need to make sure some way that you're monitoring for it. Just just out of interest, Microsoft have got a pretty good idea of what operating systems are accessing it and how many times it's being accessed with a particular account, because that's how they do their licensing. You can only connect so many devices to an individual's instance of MS365, and every time they um, they're aware, if Microsoft are aware, that means that you've probably got some policies you could set to do where you can stop BYOD or personal devices collecting if they don't have a supported operating system. Sometimes it needs looking in the background of what functionality you've got in the cloud services. Good question here, Tim, about the Montpellier. Now, if you do the Montpellier questions before April 2025, you will do CE plus based on the Montpellier questions. Okay, so If it goes end of life on the 28th of April 2025, you will still have the 3 months to complete CE plus against the Montpellier question set. Would Cyber Essentials cover multi-layering firewalls? Yeah, it obviously depends how those multi-layering firewalls are configured, etc. We're happy to have a chat about that or take it to somebody who can advise you, but we wouldn't, no, there's no restrictions like that. It's just how the basics of their blockings, and what where blocking inbound ports, etc., on the firewalls. And we would need to look at how it's configured, but we have some very knowledgeable assessors and advisors who would be able to provide advice about that configuration. Oh, right. Yeah. Here's a common question. Yeah. John Keenan. Cannon. We are at MAT with pupils from reception to year 11. All users have their own individual accounts, are moving towards a full MS365 cloud environment. How does it work with MFA for pupils that are 5 years old? It's unrealistic to provide FIDO keys to these pupils to complete homework through MS Teams at home without having a one-on-one device scheme across the MAT. Could you advise what we could do? I've had this conversation with a number of MATs about exactly this problem. Right. One of the methods out of MS365 is you can send email to a trusted email address. Now, one piece of contact detail you guys do have is you often have that piece of contact detail for the parents. The MFA could be sent to the parents' email address to provide that second layer of authentication. That is one method. It is also something, actually, I have a follow-up meeting with Microsoft about later this week, how they're looking to tackle this. It is an area that comes up very often. Yes, FIDO keys could get very, very expensive and is unrealistic, but there are ways you can do this with an authentication app. You may be able to do the authentication through to a parent's mobile phone, etc. That wouldn't be classed as sharing account. It is just a pragmatic way to the solution that when they're outside the school environment and off a trusted device, they could do that by sending the multi-factor to a trusted email account or to an authentication app that is with the parent, because often connecting to the MS365 authentication is through a QR code, sets it up, the authentication app, through a QR code. There are many devices that stop applying security updates, especially if they are old. This means that devices would need replacing, and working in a private school funding can be difficult in some areas. Would this mean that if devices are old and they don't run any updates anymore, we will mean we wouldn't fit the requirements for Cyber Essentials? Yeah, that's correct. If you have unsupported operating systems, that is an automatic failure of Cyber Essentials. It is absolutely key, if you are for Cyber Essentials, that you must have supported operating systems on those devices, and they must be receiving regular security updates. Okay. And currently for Windows, that is Windows 10 and Windows 11 devices. Um, for Apple, there are the latest three Mac OSs. Anything older than that no longer gets security updates. It is absolutely vital that you run these security updates. They are seen as a major way for attacks to be carried out. Okay, having vulnerabilities in your systems which are unpatched is a major issue. Let's take Windows XP. From the day it went end of life, Windows XP was known to have many hundreds of vulnerabilities in it, and has only ever increased. So having such a unsupported operating as Windows XP in your environment, and certainly connected to the internet, is going to expose your network, and vulnerabilities will be seen as a doorway in for the attacker. It's got another question here. Hi, Joe. Similar situation. Currently looking into one and my login as an option. Assume this would be covered as part of the password updates to CE criteria. Yes, those kind of solutions would be there. We don't actually approve solutions. We're looking at the principles behind it, etc. But anything that uses passwordless, and because basically passwordless uses two factors, just one of them isn't a password. So it is that's why we've adopted it. So it's lots of innovations, I say, going on in this way, and we need to allow passwordless through. Okay, hi Neil. 2FA is of course essential. In our schools, we currently use Google ecosystem two-step verification for our staff who have access to mobile phones. However, for students using banks of school Chromebooks, effectively hot desking, they are not allowed to access mobile phones and therefore do not have access to phone-based authentication. The only option would be a USB key, which is difficult to manage. This is where trusted devices come into it. If they are associated with trusted devices in the background, and this is invisible to the end user, so you would use some kind of cryptographic key or certificate-based authentication system that says they are accessing it through a trusted known device that would be on your network. That is acceptable. This is often what we see, and I know Google have it available and MS365 has it available. That is one way of working around. Yes, it takes a bit of technical setting up, but once it's in place, it makes it a more seamless way of logging in. But it means that if anybody tried to plug in an untrusted device to your network, they wouldn't be able to access those cloud services from it. So that's the option you need to look at. And I say the MFA guidance that's recently published. Okay. Right. I've got two more questions in here. Isn't email MFA accepted only for password resets? No, there was previous. So this is the problem with the MFA guidance being updated. I'd need to double check now. But previously, under the old guidance, which was in place until last Wednesday, a use of a trusted email address was an acceptable way. So you'd send a code to that email address instead of sending it to an authentication app. That was acceptable. We would need to check if the new guidance has been updated. The actual Joe, with regards to firewalls, do we need to block all outbound traffic and only allow certain ports, or can we keep it as block all inbound and allow all outbound? Of course, all inbound is blocked with the exception. Well, the requirement is actually to block all inbound and record any that you do have open. We don't actually talk about outbound. So it's the inbound connections must be blocked. We don't say you've got to block all outbound, obviously, but if you're going outbound, you'll be needing to go outbound for your anti-malware software anyway, because it will need to go and talk to a device on the internet to receive its updates, and there's a lot of communication there. So we don't actually talk too much about outbound traffic and only allowing certain outbound ports, but we definitely block all inbound because that's what they're looking for. The attacker's looking for the open inbound ports. So you need to block by default all and then record when you have them open. So you must be monitoring and approving all open inbound ports. Okay, got some more Q&A. Would using Intune MAM policy of staff email on mobile phones with restrictions on making sure the latest OS, etc., are applied, is that acceptable? Yeah, that's exactly what we've been talking about. That's a really good way is to use Intune for these. If you block an unsupported operating system from connecting to your cloud services, that's it. They won't be able to connect. So that meets the requirements. And that is something that certainly is one of the things we'll be talking to Microsoft about later. this week. Where can I find specific information regarding it's extended security update costs, by the way. Extended support and extended security updates, they're two different packages, believe it or not. I was led to believe it wasn't as much as a £50 per device. Could this be clarified? There's something you'd have to confirm with Microsoft. There are reports that it's $50. I haven't seen any UK pricing, but it's reports it's going to be $50 per device for the first year. If if it fits what happened with Windows 7, I think they did the same thing. It was $50 per device then, and they made it £50 per device in the UK. They're not going to make it a different. I don't think see them doing it any differently to that. But you would need to speak to a Microsoft volume licensing reseller to access that kind of extended support. Is not having MFA for student accounts on MS365 cause a failure of Cyber Essentials? Yes, it could lead to a failure of Cyber Essentials if you're not applying it. That is correct. Remember that MS365 can be, I don't want to, can be misconfigured. It wouldn't take a lot to give somebody the wrong account and give them a bit more admin rights, etc. It's just really, really good practice nowadays that if you're using a cloud service such as MS365, okay, you should be turning MFA on. And now, here's another thing. Microsoft are really moving to this anyway, and will be making it the default way to log on. If you're not going to have it applied, you know, I think you've got to, everybody's got to have it in the back of mind. If you're using a cloud service such as MS365 going forward, you need to be configuring it for MFA going forward. Okay. Is this really? Yeah. The presentation will be made available afterwards. We're recording it today, and yes, there will be. Are the DfE mandating just CE or is it CE plus? Do you know? I don't actually know. I can't offer that, but we could find that out. I have a sneaky feeling it's initially CE, but if they're going to do that to start with, I'll be looking towards you'll be going to CE plus. Now, remember that when you do CE self-assessment, when you do that, you really should be in a position to go for CE plus afterwards. You need to be very, very close. So my colleague Sharon's chipped in on the thing. We understand it is CE at the moment. Okay, that's good. Are there any good links or resources to quickly identify which web browsers are still supported? Okay, right. Which web browsers? Well, my top tip there is turn auto updates on for web browsers. Okay, that is my top tip. That is something we would look for in Cyber Essentials. The updates for web browsers are very common. It normally checks nearly every time you open it. If you're using something like Google Chrome, Firefox, they will check for updates nearly every time, as I say, you open it. Some of the older ones, such as Internet Explorer, you shouldn't be using those. They're outdated now, etc. So there isn't a quick resource for it, but my top tip is have auto updates turned on for all your internet browsers. Okay. I can see somebody's posted a very good article about end of support for Windows 10 in the education sector. Thank you for that. I personally will also have a read of that to just keep yourself up to date and make sure we're on track. Okay. What I can say to you is If you do want any more information, please contact info@iasme.co.uk. It's on the screen. Please follow us on our social media Twitter accounts and our LinkedIn channel. There is a LinkedIn group if you want more questions. Have more questions after this event where the team here at IASME can answer going forward. But I'd like to thank you for your time today and say if you need anything else from IASME, please contact us with what you can see on the screen. And I hope it all goes very well for you in your journey. And let's make it a successful journey for all of you in the world of Cyber Essentials. Thank you very much.